On the afternoon of March 4, 1966, a Douglas DC-8 taxied down the runway at Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport. Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 402 was beginning a transcontinental journey to Vancouver, carrying 72 passengers and crew. In the cockpit sat a crew that left nothing to chance. Captain Cecil N. McNeil was at the helm with over 26,000 flight hours. He and his officers had flown this route and this specific aircraft countless times. But as they crossed into Japanese airspace, their planned stopover at Tokyo's Haneda Airport was rapidly disappearing. A dense, blinding fog had rolled in off Tokyo Bay, reducing visibility on the ground to near zero. The crew was navigating a state-of-the-art jetliner that could cross oceans with precision, but at Haneda, that technology collided with an elemental blindness. They were heading into a void where years of flight experience would be tested against a complete lack of visual reference. For nearly an hour, Flight 402 circled in a holding pattern. They attempted to descend, but the fog was so thick they had to abort the maneuver, completely unable to spot Haneda's runways. They even considered diverting to Taipei. Then air traffic control radioed with a sliver of hope. Visibility at the airport had suddenly improved to about 800 meters. McNeil requested permission to make one final attempt at landing. This diagram illustrates the aircraft's final approach. You can see the required glide path here, but about 1 mile out, Flight 402's actual trajectory dipped 20 feet below the safe approach angle. Air traffic control explicitly warned the crew to level off. They acknowledged the warning, but they didn't correct their descent. Instead, the captain made a final radio transmission, asking the tower to dim the approach lights. The moment that transmission ended, the aircraft pitched sharply downward. The jet plummeted. Just 2,800 feet from the runway threshold, the heavy landing gear clipped the number 14 approach light. The plane tore through 11 more lighting structures before violently slamming into a seawall. In an instant, a standard arrival turned into a disaster. A pilot with decades of experience had made a final, inexplicable spatial decision that drove his aircraft directly into the ground. The impact and fire left little behind. Rescue workers navigated through scattered debris and massive landing gear tires. 64 people died that night. But the tragedy at Haneda was only beginning. Less than 24 hours later, passengers aboard BOAC Flight 911 looked out their windows as they taxied for takeoff. They rolled directly past the still smoldering wreckage of the Canadian Pacific jet. Those passengers would not survive the afternoon. After taking off, Flight 911 hit severe turbulence and broke apart in midair. All 124 people perished. Coming just a month after an all-Nippon Airways crash in Tokyo Bay, these back-to-back disasters exposed a terrifying reality. Commercial aviation in the mid-20th century was highly unpredictable and far more fragile than the flying public was led to believe. To find the cause of the Canadian Pacific crash, investigators ruled out mechanical failure. The DC-8 was functioning perfectly. The failure lay in the pilot's final physical inputs. This diagram shows spatial disorientation. In thick fog, the intense glow of approach lights scatters through water droplets, creating a false horizon. McNeil wasn't trying to dive. He was fatally attempting to align the DC-8 with a horizon that simply wasn't there. The aircraft's engineering was sound, but the human sensory system was easily tricked. Biological vulnerability, rather than mechanical design, proved to be the ultimate weak link in the system. Among the victims of Flight 402 was an American named Frank Burdell. Shortly after the crash, his widow returned to the United States and filed a lawsuit against Canadian Pacific Airlines in Illinois, but the airline pointed to a set of international aviation rules known as Article 28. These rules dictated that a victim's family could only sue in the airline's home country, its principal place of business, or the final destination. Even though the airline had an office in Chicago, Mrs. Burdell was legally barred from suing in her home state. The lawsuit was governed by the Warsaw Convention, an international treaty that strictly limited an airline's financial responsibility. No matter the circumstances, a passenger's life was capped at 125,000 Poincare francs, a figure that, in 1966, meant a maximum payout of just $8,300. The international legal framework of the 1960s operated as a structural shield for the airline industry, prioritizing the financial stability of global carriers over the individual lives of the passengers they transported. There was exactly one loophole for families trying to escape that $8,000 limit. They had to prove that the damage was caused by the airline's willful misconduct. This placed an impossible burden on the victims. Widows and orphans were forced into years of costly litigation, tasked with proving that a deceased pilot, who had just died in a horrific accident, had acted with intentional, gross negligence in his final moments. The Burdell case and the back-to-back tragedies of 1966 generated public outrage, but the global aviation industry dug its heels in. Airlines and regulators fought bitterly to keep these restrictive liability limits low for decades to come. Over time, engineers and safety boards would learn how to mitigate the deadly optical illusions that doomed Flight 402, but the institutional apathy that so casually devalued human life couldn't be fixed with a diagram or a new instrument panel. It remained safely buried in the fine print.